Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you once again, Mr. Giroux, for attending INAN. My questions are going to be about Arctic sovereignty, and I spoke to you earlier about your report that's on the 2%. I have it here in front of me, Canada's military expenditure and the NATO 2% spending target. So that's what I'll be referring to. But for context, I'm going to read an article because I've spoken with a lot of people from the territories in Nunavut that are very concerned about the Arctic threat of Putin and other nations that see Arctic as an area that to possibly challenge Canada and its sovereignty on. So from a Reuters article, January 27, 2023, Putin discusses Russia claim to giant chunk of Arctic Ocean seabed. Moscow. President Vladimir Putin held talks on Friday with top security officials about the status of Russia's efforts to legally expand the outer boundaries of its continental shelf in the Arctic Ocean. Moscow said at the time it wanted much more Arctic seabed, a move that has implications for Canada, Denmark, who also have their own claims. Russia's neighbors in the Arctic have become increasingly concerned about Moscow's ambitions in the strategically important region since it sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine in February last year. And it goes without saying that that Russia is currently on the move. And where are they going to go next, I think, is the next question. And in your testimony today, you've talked about already, we've heard it from various members here, the outcomes for this government are a problem. And it's often we see it as money thrown at things but don't necessarily land, or outcomes aren't measured, or as we just spoke about, there's not even a dartboard to throw the dart at. There's no target to even hit. So it brings up a leak that came out of the Pentagon. I was at the Pentagon a few weeks ago, and it brings up this the leak that the Prime Minister said he's never going to meet the target. And from the Washington Post, Trudeau told NATO that Canada will never meet its spending goal, is a quote. Germany is concerned, Turkey is disappointed. Well, it appears by your report that it's in plain sight, too, that this promise to never meet the goal. I'm just concerned about how kind of lower than even this threshold actually is. So from your report on page 4, it says military expenditure as a percentage of GDP currently is at 2022-2023, 1.33%. Next year is 1.46%. Next year is 1.51%. Next year, 1.54%. Next year, 1.59%. The problem with that is that's what the promise is. But and I'll refer you to the estimates where we've discovered it, because again, one thing that the northern communities are concerned about is NORAD, and the NORAD modernization promise was big, a lot of fanfare, $4.9 billion. But this is what was in the estimate. So funding for North American Aerospace Defense Command modernization and Canadian Armed Forces communications capabilities, the promise was $4.9 billion. The actual expenditure is $45,357,526. So you talk about an outcome not being realized. You know, billions needed and millions getting spent, and it's to analyze the situation. My question for you is, does the PM's record on military spending give you confidence that spending on Arctic sovereignty and security is on track?
When we did that report, we did that after Russia invaded Ukraine, and there were lots of questions about the NATO target of hitting 2% of GDP allocated to national defense. So we looked at the plans, the current plans, or the plans that were known at that time for military expenditures, and we found that there's a gap of between $13 and $18 billion per year for Canada to meet the 2% NATO target. So I can't comment specifically on one area of spending because I'm not a military expert, but there is a gap between the spending plan and the 2% target.
And thank you for that. I have 30 seconds left, but I'll refer to the Auditor General's report on Arctic water surveillance. And in the conclusion, it said, we concluded that the federal organizations we audited, and I can go through them, had not taken the action required to build the maritime domain awareness they collectively needed to respond to safety and security risks associated with increasing vessel traffic in Arctic waters.
Just point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Aldag?
I'm just trying to understand. This is fascinating, but I call the question on relevance to the hearing that we're doing today.
Yeah.
We've invited the Parliamentary Budget Officer here. Specifically, the notice of meeting says on the research and comparative analysis on the estimates of the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs and the Department of Indigenous Services. We're not here to talk about the Prime Minister's spending on defense and other things, Arctic sovereignty, if it's framed within the context of the study, but I'm not seeing any relevance. I'm just wondering if you could give us a ruling on this, because I know there's not a lot of time left.
Can I hopefully I still have a little bit of time from that?
You've got about 5 seconds on your time, but you can reply to that if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I was in the midst of making a comment, and then I had 15 seconds left on my clock when I was asked. I mean, the relevance is there. I asked the Parliamentary Budget Officer when I came in if I could refer to his report on 2% NATO spending. My role in the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee is a Northern Affairs, Arctic Sovereignty, and Northern Economic Development. It's very relevant to the people of the North, and very relevant even to the Parliamentary Budget Officer that's sitting at the end of the table. So I think it is relevant.
Fair enough. I'll give you your 15 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just finish with this. Furthermore, the existing satellite services and infrastructure did not provide the capacity that the federal organizations needed to perform surveillance of Arctic waters. Delays in the renewal of satellite ships and aircraft risk compromising the presence of these organizations in Arctic waters. And I think this is, again, one of those outcomes that we need to see realized for our own sovereignty and security.